Hello, everybody. This is Bernie Stroum, and welcome So You Think You Know the Red Sox with Bernie Stroum. This week, we're going to go over the 1981 season. And 1981 is the beginning of my running my own business. So I had even less time. I lived in LA. I started my own business, and I did follow the Red Sox. I did have a satellite dish. I watched as many games as possible, but I worked a lot, so I uh, don't know a lot about the Red Sox in the early 1980s as much as I would like. I do know a lot compared to the average person, but to what I knew about them prior to this season, I knew less. So I'm going to rely a little bit more on the internet and some research I did than any personal observations I had in 1981. Uh, as we get closer to 86, I started to follow them more, of course, and my personal recollections will start getting back to where they were in the previous seasons that we went over since 1959. We did start in 59, and we're now in 1981. Anyway, today we're going back to the Red Sox season that I think, as I reviewed it, was like unlike any other. The year was 1981. Baseball was a little strange in 1981. There was a players' strike. There was a 2-month interruption in the middle of the season. We never saw anything like that before. And there were first half champions, second half champions. And when everything was finished, the Red Sox actually played pretty good baseball, but they just didn't make the playoffs. But before we get to the strike, let's go and review what happened in the winter of 1980 because there were some significant changes for the Boston Red Sox. For most of the 1970s, the Red Sox had a recognizable lineup that included Carlton Fisk, Fred Lynn, Jim Rice, Carl Yastrzemski, Dwight Evans, Rick Burleson. But by opening day 1981, that team was disappearing, and it happened really quick. Rick Burleson was traded to the California Angels in December of 1980. Carney Lansford came in exchange for Burleson. And in January 81, the Red Sox traded Fred Lynn along with Steve Renko to the Angels for Frank Tanana, Joe Rudy, and Jim Dorsey. I do remember thinking that was one of the worst trades that you could ever imagine, and I think history has borne me out with that one. Burleson Lynn is gone, but then the next one was really bizarre. The Red Sox lost Carlton Fisk because of a contract technicality. They didn't send his contract out to a day late, and Major League Baseball declared him a free agent. He was signed by the Chicago White Sox, as everybody knows, and the Red Sox lost probably the best catcher in their history. Pretty sad. That I remember really well. So with the up the middle pieces, the center fielder, the shortstop, and the catcher gone, so were the 1970s, and a new episode in Red Sox history is beginning, the 1980s. I don't want to forget that the manager was also gone after having a disappointing 80s season. Don Zimmer was canned, and Ralph Houk, what the Red Sox, in a long line of the Red Sox hiring Yankee ex-managers, Ralph Houk came in to manage the Red Sox in 81. And that about did it for the winter of 1980. Along comes April, and the opponent in the opener was the White Sox, which meant Carlton Fisk returned to Fenway Park on opening day. That was unbelievable. Boston's lineup for 81 included Gary Allenson behind the plate, Tony Perez at first, Lansford at third, Glenn Hoffman in short, Rice in left, Miller in center, and Dwight Evans in right. Still an okay lineup, but not what they had in the past. Eckersley was the opening day pitcher. Red Sox lost that game 5-3 couple of days later, the Red Sox finally got their first win, 5-4, and they were really inconsistent until about April 19th, which, as you may or may not know, is the annual Patriots Day game. They start that game at 11 a.m. in the morning so the crowd can file out in the Kenmore Square and watch the finish of the Boston Marathon. Beginning on April 19th, and the next couple of days they won. They got their record to 6-3, but that's about as good as it's got as they went downhill from there. The end of April came. Texas came to Fenway Park and shut the Red Sox down. They lost 3 straight to the Rangers, 10-9, 5-0 with 2 of the scores. They suffered then 3 consecutive shutout losses. Minnesota at the end of April beat them. So the Red Sox finished April 7-9, not exactly the start us Red Sox fans were hoping for, but May was much better, and one of the biggest reasons was Dwight Evans. In 1981, Evans was no longer simply the great defensive right fielder with the tremendous throwing arm. He was becoming one of the best all-around players in baseball. His offense changed dramatically, and he was hitting for power, not just hitting singles and doubles, which he had done previously. He was getting on base. He was becoming more selective on the plate. And another, along with Carney Lansford, who won the batting title that year, they had to overcome the loss of Lynn and Burleson. So those 2 players basically did it. Jerry Memmi was still at second base, but he wasn't the player he was before he injured his knee. Rice remained the major power threat, but Tony Perez was 39 years old and Carlos Yastrzemski was 41, so it was an aging team. Red Sox also had Dave Stapleton, who was moved around the infield, played many positions, and as May progressed, Boston began climbing into the American League pennant race. One interesting game came at the end of the month, May 30th at Fenway. The Milwaukee Brewers were one of the most dangerous offensive clubs in baseball. Boston beat Milwaukee that day 7-6. That matchup would become much more important later in the year. By early June, the Red Sox were playing solid baseball, and on June 2nd, they beat Cleveland 4-0, and on the 5th, they defeated Oakland 4-1, and then they went to Seattle. After losing 2-0 on the 8th, the Red Sox came back in the next 2 nights and beat the Mariners 10-1 and 4-2, and the Red Sox record was 30-25. So they didn't look that bad. But then came June 11th. The Red Sox were in California. The Angels beat Boston 7-2. Boston's record was 30-26. And then baseball stopped. Players strike. That was a killer. As I take a sip of coffee, I hope everybody's enjoying this Sunday morning. The players went on strike. The disagreement centered largely around, I don't really remember, so I got this off the internet, so I apologize. The disagreement centered around compensation for teams losing players through free agency. The players feared that if the teams had to surrender valuable players as compensation for signing free agents, the system would effectively destroy the free agent market. Neither side gave in. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. There was no Red Sox baseball, no Yankees baseball. There was no baseball at all. The season disappeared from the calendar from the middle of June through early August. At the time of the strike, the Red Sox were in 5th place in the American League East, but don't let that 5th place fool you. They were 30-26, only 4 games behind the Yankees. The American League East was extremely crowded. New York was 34-22, Baltimore 2 games back, Milwaukee 3, Detroit 3.5, and Boston was 4 games back. 5 teams were separated by only 4 games, sort of reminded you of 1967. Then Major League Baseball came up with a very unusual solution when the strike finally ended. Instead of simply continuing the standings, baseball split the season into 2 halves. The teams that had been leading their division when the strike began were declared first half champions. That meant that the Yankees were automatically in the postseason in the American League East. When play resumed, everybody started over 0-0. The second half winner would qualify for the postseason. It was almost like starting an entirely new season in August. The All-Star game was played on August 9th, and on August 10th, the Red Sox returned to Fenway Park. Their opponent once again was the Chicago White Sox, and the restart didn't go well. Chicago beat them 7-1. The White Sox won again the following night. Boston won the third game 8-1, and the fourth game of the series 9-6. The second half was underway. Late August became one of Boston's best stretches of baseball. On August 20th, they beat Oakland 6-4. Then they swept 3 games from Seattle. Excuse me. Boston beat Oakland 3 straight times, 27th, 28th, and 29th of August. And on August 31st, the Red Sox beat California 4-1. Suddenly, Boston had a real opportunity. And as September began, the second half of the American League race became extremely competitive. This is where Ralph Houck's Red Sox became interesting. They weren't a dominant team, but they wouldn't go away. On September 8th and 9th. They won back-to-back games in Detroit. Then came an important stretch with New York on the 12th. At Yankee Stadium, Boston beat the Yankees 2-1. A few days later, the Red Sox returned to Fenway Park and swept Detroit. They won 5-2 on September 14th. Then on the 16th, they swept a doubleheader from the Tigers. The next day, Boston won again. That was 4 straight victories over Detroit. Then the Yankees arrived in Fenway Park. Boston lost the opener on the 18th, but the Red Sox beat the Yankees on the 19th. 8-5. 8-5, excuse me. I'm going to take a sip of coffee here. So they looked pretty good. The Red Sox were right in the middle of the second half race, and now came the team that they had to beat, the Milwaukee Brewers. Boston opened a 3-game series against Milwaukee on September 21st. Red Sox won that game 9-3, but then Milwaukee won the next one 10-8. Boston won the rubber match 11-5. 2 wins out of 3 against the Braves. Boston was still alive, but this was a race with almost no margin for error. Milwaukee was playing well. Detroit was still there. Baltimore was there. Red Sox needed to keep winning. Unfortunately, that's where things began to slip. Boston lost 3 of 4 to Cleveland on September 24th and 20 through 27th. Then came was probably the biggest series of the season. The Red Sox went to Milwaukee for 3 games. Beginning the 28th, the first game was a pitcher's battle. Milwaukee shut them out 1-0. Not only was that painful, but Boston came back the next night because they won. So they could have won the first 2, but they didn't. They split them. They still had an opportunity to win, but on the 30th, Milwaukee beat the Red Sox 10-5. The Brewers were closing in on the second half championship. Boston went to Cleveland to finish the season. The Indians beat them 11-4. Boston won 4-0 on the 3rd of October. On the 4th, the Red Sox played their final game of a very strange season, and they won. Mike Torres beat Cleveland 6-2. The final record was 59 wins, 49 losses. Not a bad season for that shortened season. Once again, I'm sorry for coughing. Boston's second half record was 29-23. Good enough for a tie for second place, but once again, they finished a game and a half behind the Brewers. Although it was a good season, they weren't in the playoffs, so Boston's season was over. And when you look at the stats, there were some terrific individual performances in 1981 for the Red Sox. Dwight Evans played all 108 games, hit .296, 22 home runs, 71 runs, batted in, scored 84 runs, and had 85 walks in only 108 games. His on-base percentage was .415, and this was only a 108-game season. Evans tied the American League in home runs and finished 3rd in MVP voting. He won a Gold Glove, he won a Silver Slugger Award, and he made the All-Star team. This was the season when Dwight Evans truly established himself as one of the best players in the American League. Then, of course, there was Carney Lansford, his first season in Boston at .336, won the American League batting championship. 134 hits, 23 doubles, 52 runs batted in, 15 stolen bases. And considering Boston traded Rick Burleson for him, I think that was a pretty even trade. Remy had an excellent year, even though his knees were hurting him. He hit 307. Jim Rice hit 284 with 17 home runs. Stapleton even hit 285. And then there was a new catcher, Rich Gedman, who was only a 21-year-old kid from Massachusetts. He played in 62 games, hit 288, didn't quite replace Fisk, but that was still a pleasant surprise. He was second in the Rookie of the Year voting in 1981. So after losing Carlton Fisk, the Red Sox suddenly had a young catcher that looked to be pretty good. Yastrzemski was now in the twilight of his career in 91 games. He played 91 games. He was 41. He only hit 246 with 7 home runs. And Yaz's career was coming to an end, which it would end a couple of years later. But he was still a presence in the lineup, and the Red Sox fans had watched him since 1961. He still meant something to the Sox. Eckersley was only 9-8 with a 4.27 ERA. Tanana, who was got received by the Red Sox in the Fred Lynn trade, only went 4-10 with a 4.01 average. That was terrible. And Mike Torres had a good season. He was 10-3 with a 3.68 average. The entire Boston pitching staff had a 3.81 ERA. It wasn't spectacular, but it was respectable. So what did I make of the 1981 Red Sox? There wasn't a championship. There wasn't a playoff. But they were much better. They were a much better team. Their overall winning percentage was .546. They simply ran into a split season. They didn't play a full season, and they were one of the teams that got shortchanged because we didn't play 162 seasons. The biggest thing I think about when I think about 1981 season is we passed the 15-minute mark here. It's going to go a minute or two longer. That the 1970s bashing Red Sox were gone. Fisk, Lynn, Burleson, Yastrzemski was hitting the end of his career. Evans was coming up. Jim Rice remained the same. Carney Lansford was a good addition. Remy was still good at second base. Gedman was arriving. And there were young players coming up. Wade Boggs, Bruce Hurst, Marty Barrett, Oil Can Boyd, and eventually a young pitcher named Roger Clemens. The 81 Sox were caught somewhere between two eras. They weren't the powerhouse 75 team, and they weren't yet the team that won the pennant in 86. They were somewhere in between. And because the season was interrupted for nearly 2 months, 81 just is a season that is forgotten, not only by the Red Sox, but most other teams in baseball. They battled Milwaukee the final weeks. They only lost by 1.5 games. They could have turned that around, just winning 2 more games against Milwaukee, but they didn't. It was a strange season, but the Red Sox did play pretty good. And here you go. Let me see what I have here. And that's going to be it, I think. It was an okay season. They headed towards 1986. Next week, we will do 1982 as they start building that team that eventually culminated in the appearance in the 1986 World Series against the New York Mets. That's going to be quite a week when we do 1986. I still can't watch the replay of the Bill Buckner error when it comes on MLB.com or MLB TV. I just switched the channel. Anyway, that's it for today. I'm Bernie Stroum, and this has been another edition of So You Think You Know the Red Sox. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you the same time next week when we discuss 1982. Have a nice Sunday, everybody.